Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment of the Warwick F1 Show, and we are back now with another news episode bringing you guys all of the latest headlines from the world of F1. I'm your host Callum, and today I'm joined by our site's president Katch once again and a returning guest Vignesh. Thank you very much both for coming onto the podcast today, because we have got a lot to talk about that is broken over the last few days. So to update you on the recent Red Bull drama, and wow, there is a lot of it, as I've already mentioned. So Perez leaving Red Bull, he's not going to be in that seat for 2025. This was something that we kind of already could guess, judging his lack of performance from the last stages of the 2024 season. However, something that I think came to a shock to many of us was that he's actually going to be replaced by Liam Lawson, a driver who looked very good in his first few races when he replaced Daniel Ricciardo back in 2023, but has still yet to complete an actual full F1 season. And now he is in arguably one of the biggest seats in F1. And in his place at RB is going to be Isaac Hadjar, an F2 driver who Red Bull have also have in their driver academy currently. So Vignesh, we'll come to you first. We're going to touch on Perez, I think, and talk about Perez a little bit first. I think this was coming, wasn't it? I think his performances have really been completely not up to standard. And if anything, it's too late to be getting rid of him by the end of the 2024 season. Arguably, should have been done almost midway through the season.
Yeah, it's been this decision has it's been a while. I mean, we all saw this coming. Anyone who says that they like this decision was a surprise to him surely must be lying. Honestly, I think he should have probably gone by the summer break. I clearly didn't understand why Red Bull chose to extend his contract for next year. I think sometime before the British Grand Prix, I think they're trying to instill faith in him to show that, okay, we're supporting you despite your poor form across the European season, like this year. But it clearly backfired. And honestly, given his performance over the last 2 years, including this season, it's no surprise as to why they chose to let him go. Because after some point, even with the loss in money due to Red Bull finishing third in the constructors, Red Bull have to realize that they need more like they need to find the balance between win tunnel time and the prize earnings. And I guess this is the last straw for them essentially.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was, I think maybe you mentioned they obviously did make that decision to extend his contract, and I think you're right that this was maybe a measure to try and instill faith and try and get some performance out of him, reassuring Perez that he was fine in his seat to try and get his confidence back a little bit. Because we should say as well that even though we have talked and seen over the last stages of this season that he has been on really poor form, he's still a driver that has delivered really great performances ultimately. And I think it was certainly the right decision from Red Bull to bring him in when they did, and he's done great things in that seat for sure. But I think certainly we're right in that it was the time to go. But now the more interesting part is that he is being replaced by Liam Lawson. Vignesh, I want to get your thoughts on this. Surely there's so much to unpack here with. Not only are you bringing in a driver that has had less than a full season in F1, but now you're bringing in, you're forgetting about someone who's been at RB for years in Yuki Tsunoda, and that must feel awful for Tsunoda to be almost forgotten about like that from Red Bull.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by his decision, but given the different takes and opinions I've seen on YouTube as well as Twitter, I kind of understand why Red Bull chose to go with Lawson over Sonoda. The way I see it is the fact that they view Lawson as a more level-headed person than Yuki, which I'm not sure is this actual case because we saw Lawson go head to head with Perez a couple of times, especially in Mexico, and Alonso as well throughout the last six races of the season. But one thing I noticed is that I believe Lawson is won on debut across like different junior categories, whether it's like F2, I think F3, and even in Super Formula last year. So maybe Red Bull believe that his adaptability across different categories gives him the edge over Sonoda. And another thing I personally believe is holding Sonoda back from getting a promotion is the Honda links. If Yuki was sponsored by Red Bull rather than Honda. Like he was a Honda Academy driver. So given the fact that Honda is leaving Red Bull in 2026 to join Aston Martin, it would make more sense for Red Bull to have a driver from their own academy rather than somebody who's sponsored by Honda who's no longer going to be with Red Bull essentially. So, which is why they're giving him the chance. And despite the fact that Yuki's had the edge over him in qualifying over the last six races, they've been quite close. And I guess this is probably the reason why they would rather see their own academy graduates rather than Honda. The same thing could be said for Ayumi Iwasa over Isaac Hadjar. I mean, we'll probably talk about Hadjar's promotion as well, but the reason why I see Hadjar being given the promotion is because he's a Red Bull Academy driver rather than a Honda Academy driver. So I think all these factors kind of play a role as to why Lawson got the promotion over Tsunoda.
There's certainly many reasons, I think, as you mentioned, Vignesh, why it would be, I think, favourable to go for Lawson. And I do think he has shown a lot of potential, especially when he first came in to replace Daniel Ricciardo. Katch, do you think that this is the right decision and that it makes sense to go for? And also as well, Tsunoda did drive the Red Bull car in the postseason testing for Abu Dhabi. And so do you think it was maybe a lack of performance as well that kind of came into it as to why they didn't go with Tsunoda? Or do you think this is purely to stick within the Red Bull Academy as we know that Red Bull like to do?
So, sure, he did the postseason test. There wasn't a lack of performance. From what I've seen, obviously we don't get all the data and everything, none of the journalists do, but from what I've seen, everyone was impressed with Tsunoda. He was on pace, he would have qualified, I think, top 5, top 6 with his lap times easily. His attitude towards the engineers, he brought a lot of technical insight, so everything was steering him in that direction of being ready for this Red Bull promotion. Because he's been at the team for like 3-4 years now. He's got all the data. He's done all the training. There is all the reasons that they were holding on to about why they wouldn't promote him in his first or second season are completely out the window now. I see absolutely no reason why Liam deserves this promotion. Like, absolutely none. He was... Sure, there's the argument that Vignesh made and brought up that Lawson's been good in his first seasons, and he's adapted really well. But it's not like this is Yuki's first time in a Red Bull. And it's not like the Red Bull car is now the fastest car on the grid and Yuki has to be able to qualify second or third. Because I don't even think Max is going to be qualifying second or third next season. So I just don't see this as the correct decision under any circumstances. And it completely pushes Yuki out the side. And I think Red Bull now, the organisation, have to be realistic in the fact that Tsunoda's not going to stay for 26. If I was Yuki Tsunoda, I would do a Pierre Gasly, and I would try to leave and find a better opportunity, because it's obvious that he is not valued in that organisation and institution anymore. So jump ship, go elsewhere where you're actually going to be used and valued and wanted by your team.
That's a good point. Although you do mention, Katch, that obviously Verstappen might not even be qualifying second or third next season if the Red Bull car isn't as good. And we certainly have seen in the latter stages of this season that McLaren are on the up and Ferrari are on the up, and Red Bull are almost kind of coming down on that period of dominance. And so is that maybe more of a reason, Katch, why they are more likely to go with someone like Lawson for now? Because it's a young driver of theirs that they can build from the ground up, and they can get experience in that seat while the car isn't exactly there, so that when in the future the car is there, then he's going to be able to perform.
That's a valid point. That is a good point, and I guess Lawson being technically their own makes sense. Tsunoda's also comes through the Red Bull ranks, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not like he's not one of their own either. Yeah, I guess if they wanted to properly build from the bottom and they would bring a real young driver in, they wouldn't. I guess that's why they're bringing Hadjar in, just to test it out. But for the moment, like, they're thinking really long term at this point if they're going to put Lawson in instead of Tsunoda, because that's making the assumption that Tsunoda's not going to be able to develop and Tsunoda's not going to have the next years of experience going into the new regs, which I just see as completely unreasonable. And in a way, sure, Lawson's had these 6 races, but a lot of this and a lot of the discourse I'm seeing online is remembering that when Lawson was brought in for Ricciardo was like a super sub, like them 1 races that he did. And it just wasn't those performances. That's the same mistake as they made with Nick de Vries, bringing him into RB. I don't know. Just to me, it makes literally zero sense. I know this news was coming, and I saw that Lawson was going to get the promotion, but again, I think it's completely baffling from a long-term point of view.
Yeah, and you did mention Nick de Vries there as an example of how things could go wrong. Vignesh, I want to ask you first. I'll get both of your takes on this about what do we think that Lawson is actually capable of, not just in his first couple of seasons, but also long term for Red Bull. Because I think the thing that sticks in my mind is, like, for example, the case with Nick de Vries and maybe Pierre Gasly in a way, where if you rush someone into such a big seat like that, especially at a team like Red Bull, where we know how tough they are on their drivers and how impatient they can get, and in my mind, it gets to a point where, like, is this going to ruin his career? Because we know that Lawson is talented and we know that he has so much potential, but I don't almost want him to get into a situation like Pierre Gasly where that potential and what he's capable of is ruined because he's rushed into that seat too early. Vignesh, do you think that this is what's happening, or do you think that Lawson has the capabilities to perform?
And my initial thoughts were this felt like a Gasly or Albon situation where Albon raced the first half of 2019 in the AlphaTauri and then switched over to Red Bull. I feel like Lawson could pull off similar performances to what Albon did in 2019, but there's obviously going to be pressure on. There's going to be lots of pressure on him for the first half of the season, like leading up to summer break, with like talks about if he's underperforming, then they're probably Honda would probably push the case for Tsunoda to get the promotion, or if Tsunoda is doing really well, then obviously there could be a driver swap mid-season. But honestly think Liam's capable of handling the pressure because I've heard a couple of his podcasts ever since the news came out, and it seems like throughout his career he's had points where he was unsure about his future, whether it's a move jumping from F4 to like F3 or like earlier in his karting days, and the fact that he had to like work quite a bit to get sponsorships and work his way up through the karting series essentially. And I feel like that kind of gives him the mentality edge to handle the pressure that comes to see. And also, given the fact that Katch mentioned that Red Bull may not be the second or even the quickest team next season, so that kind of eases the pressure off of him to perform as well as Perez did over the last 2 3 years. They could be fighting for like maybe like the final podium spots or like somewhere between third and sixth. So in that case, he can take time to build in his skills, learn from Max if like about the driving style, and then when it comes to 2026, it's a clean slate, and then he can work his way from there.
I mean, to be fair, his predecessor, to get one up on him, he just needs to be consistent in the top 10, really, because it's not, with Perez, he's not following too much of performance. And as you mentioned, Vignesh, that if the Red Bull car isn't as good as it has been in the past couple of seasons, then he wouldn't be expected of that anyway. Katch, are you along similar lines that you think that Lawson will be capable of stepping up to the task, or is this maybe not the best thing for his career?
I think it's probably the best. So it's the best thing for his career in the sense that he's got the seat, he's able to prove. It's not like when Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon had those awful stints at Red Bull, they then lost their seat and never came back to the grid. Because it's obvious they've got that technical ability, and they can work in a Red Bull car in a top team. So I think this is probably the best move for his career, getting the seat. No one's going to turn down a Red Bull promotion, are they? They'd be stupid not to. But is he going to do really well? I doubt it. Because sure, unless he consistently outperforms Yuki, he is still going to be compared to Yuki, especially for that first half of the season. Because most people assumed and believed that Tsunoda was the one who was going to get that promotion. So I think what Lawson has to do to deserve that seat is just outperform Yuki completely, wipe the floor with him in that RB. And I know that's a weird comparison, seeing as that Tsunoda's in that worst car, sure. But we know what Tsunoda's capable of. We know he can qualify in the top 10. We know his racecraft is great. So that's not going to go away. In a way, Tsunoda's going to have a lot more hunger. He's going to have a lot more fight, knowing that he's been shafted from this promotion. So, I don't know. Will Lawson do well? I'm not too optimistic. I don't think he will do great. I think this will be more of an Alex 2020 situation. I'm really, really doubtful of his ability, to be honest. Even if the data says so.
Yeah, I do. I think I do have to agree. And obviously, as I will remind our listeners, I have been wrong on this podcast many times before. Too many times. But it does just give me too many vibes of Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Nick de Vries of maybe just rushing into that seat. And in a way, it's for me, it's not that I'm doubting Lawson's ability. It's almost I'm feeling bad for him that this has come to him at too early in his career, perhaps, because like we mentioned, obviously if Lawson in his position is approached with the Red Bull seat, obviously he's going to take it, but it's just wondering if this is going to if it's actually come his way at the right point in his career, because Red Bull are desperate at the moment. Like they've struggled with that second seat for so long, really since Daniel Ricciardo left back at the end of the 2018 season, and I think that's really showing in this situation here, and also you could argue maybe why they hung on to Perez for so long, just because of the lack of available alternatives.
Can I just raise a point? How interesting would this conversation be if Ricciardo stayed? Do you think we would then be talking about Ricciardo being promoted? Do you think? Because obviously we all know that was the reason he was brought into that RB seat, was to get promoted to Red Bull. And then he violently underperformed and eventually got kicked. But I just think that's so interesting that we're now discussing the Lawson versus Tsunoda, when actually it was written in the stars for this to be Ricciardo's seat, to be back against Verstappen.
I think if Ricciardo got promoted to that Red Bull seat, then Helmut Marko would have either had an aneurysm or Christian Horner would currently be dead with being shot by Helmut Marko. There would be some serious problems in that team, because Lawson and Tsunoda have been, they've been on similar levels. I do think that Tsunoda has gotten the better of Lawson just a little bit much, but Ricciardo was seriously underperforming. And also with Ricciardo, it's a bit different, I think, because with him, it's an aging driver. Realistically, you're only going to have a couple more years, I think, on his career before he was going to be out the sport anyway, I think, for Ricciardo, even if he was kind of performing. Whereas Lawson, you've got a young driver who is, he's there, and you're able to build on that and kind of build a new team around him in a way. Or in a way, perhaps even preparing for when Verstappen eventually departs from Red Bull. And I think that's maybe why they've made this decision. I certainly don't think that Ricciardo would have been in that Red Bull seat again. I could not see it with his performances. Even though I think everyone would have loved to see it, I just think it's not really we're not capable of that happening.
Yeah, I that is true. I do agree with you in that circumstance. I was raising it as like an interesting thing, but yeah, it would have been a short-term thing. Maybe they would have put Ricciardo in for the 25 season to give Liam another season in the RB to prepare. Maybe that was the circumstance they were going for, and maybe what they eventually were aiming for. But again, that would have stopped Hadjar. So yeah,
I do think that maybe ideally Red Bull would have hung on to Perez for a little bit longer. And it's only they're obviously they're making the decision because his form has been absolutely atrocious in the second half of the season. There has not been a form, no. But I think ideally what would have happened is that, because I really think that Red Bull haven't wanted Tsunoda anywhere near that Red Bull seat at all, no matter how good he has been. And so I think ideally they would have kept on a hold of Perez for another season, and then brought Lawson in after, give at least Lawson a full season, a full F1 season, I'd say, because surely you've got to give him a little bit of experience before you give him such a big seat like that.
Yes, that is probably what they were aiming for, but then realised so early on in the season that was just not possible. Their ideal fantasy universe was a fantasy universe. But I think it's also interesting with the dynamics at the Red Bull organisation that it's very obvious, even in the media, that certain big personnel prefer certain drivers. Like, we all know that Horner was really buddy with Ricciardo, and that Helmut Marko has some drivers that he absolutely despises. So it's interesting seeing those dynamics at play in the media.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've read somewhere that Helmut Marko wanted Ricardo out from the Spanish Grand Prix, which was round 10, I want to say. And so and it was the only reason that Ricardo survived until Singapore was just because Christian Horner was insistent in that sense. So yeah, it's interesting to see the dynamics play out there. Vignesh, I did just want to get your thoughts as well on if we move towards Tsunoda, because it's interesting to see what is actually going to happen for him now. Katch did suggest that, as I think that he should do personally, is to part ship and go with another team that he can almost restore faith in, now that it's pretty obvious that Red Bull aren't very keen for him to have that second driver seat. Are you in agreement that Tsunoda should maybe find somewhere else to go, or are we thinking that maybe he should continue to stay at RB for a shout if Lawson eventually goes?
I think it's best for Yuki to jump ship if the opportunity presents. I think this next year is going to be quite pivotal in his career. If he performs really well and destroys Hajar, I mean, given that he's a rookie, then he's obviously putting himself on the shop market for like potential suitors across the grid. Because we know next season we're going to have, I think, 6 rookies, like including Behrman, Antonelli, Dubin. So if any of them were to underperform, obviously that would put pressure on them. And Yuki, given his experience in F1 for the last 5 years, I'm pretty sure teams would be ready to snap him up if one of their rookies are underperforming. And honestly, given how even the Red Bull juniors in F3 and F2 are performing, I can see Helmut Marko prioritizing their promotion to F1 rather than keeping Yuki in that seat for 2026 and beyond. The sad part is, given that Honda's moving to Aston Martin, I would have loved to see Yuki and Alonso together. That is my dream Aston Martin lineup for 26 and beyond. But the problem is, we all know that Aston Martin is owned by Lawrence Stroll, and unless Stroll decides to voluntarily retire from the sport, it's very unlikely that anyone would take a seat. So, if anything, we could end up seeing a Stroll Yuki lineup before a Stroll Alonso lineup. I hope that it isn't the case, but I think that's his only best opportunity. Maybe Alpine if Dune underperforms, but I don't know. There have been talks about Colapinto. So honestly, I don't see his future in the Red Bull family beyond 2025.
Yeah, no, I think I was going to suggest Aston Martin actually. Completely forgetting that obviously Honda is actually is going to Aston Martin. But obviously, as we know, yes, Lance Stroll has a permanent seat there. Katch, where do you think that Tsunoda could go if he did decide to leave RB? I was going to agree with Vignesh in saying that Alpine might be a good shout and join his old buddy Pierre Gasly.
But is that relying on Jack Doohan being really bad? I think they've put Alpine.
I think so, yeah.
So Alpine, just the way they've presented themselves in the media in the past few years, they were so angry. I know it's a different management now, but they were so angry that they put so many millions of resources into Piastri for him to run away. I think they're going to be so tight-shipped to Doohan, even if Doohan is the most awful driver we've seen since Mazepin. I think they're going to keep him for a second season for the pure reason he's been a development driver for them and loyal to them for so many years. They're not going to want to get rid of him under any circumstances. So I think Alpine's a gone deal. There's no way Tsunoda can get there because of Doohan. Aston Martin, if Stroll does actually go to the WEC program or the endurance program, could be an option. I think going with Honda is probably a good idea. Maybe Tsunoda's already in discussion with Cadillac. Go over there, new project.
I was going to say Cadillac. We shouldn't forget about that. Obviously, they're coming in 2026, and they'll be looking for maybe some experience on the F1 grid to guide them through the first few seasons.
Exactly, and sure, Tsunoda. When we think of experience, we don't think of Tsunoda at the first instance, but he does have a lot of experience. He's got experience in the RB car, obviously, but also with Red Bull. He still gets the Red Bull data. He still does all the training with the Red Bull drivers. So it's not like he's been shut out from that side of the program. So I can see him going to Cadillac, maybe. That is a good option.
Yeah, so the only issue with the Cadillac situation is the fact that Sergio Perez would also be on the markets, and he also has Red Bull data. So if
There's
you're going
no
for experience,
way.
I'm pretty
There's
sure
actually no way,
if you're
surely.
going,
Perez has
But,
the
like,
Mexico money as well. Do not forget.
No,
exactly.
I don't agree with this Mexico money. I don't agree with it.
It was Red Bull decided it was enough to lose them this first and second in the constructors. It has to be worth something.
But it's surely Mexico have seen how awful his performances are, and their money has disappeared elsewhere. Surely they'll put it in Pato Award now, please. Pato Award will come over and they'll put the Mexico money in Pato then.
Sorry, Vignesh, you were saying about you think the Perez could still be on the market.
Yeah, the way I see it, Cadillac might want to push for a Colton Herta because of the whole Andretti sponsorship from their side. So they would probably want a US-based driver. So I'm pretty sure they might go for Herta if he gets a super license point, and they would probably want to pair him up with an experienced driver. So the only experienced drivers I know is like who've come out of the sport and are pretty good, like half podiums and half wins are Bottas and Perez. So given that Bottas is a reserve driver for Merck, maybe he could go to Cadillac, but Perez being based in Latin America, it's easier for them because they would probably set up their factory in the UK as well as the US. And despite his, like troubling times at Red Bull, you forget that he was a very good midfield driver for Force India and Racing Point. So I mean, like, pretty sure if Cadillac enters the sport, they'll probably be towards the back of the field. And if they have a driver like Perez, maybe that could give them the edge in 2026 when it comes to like scoring valuable points or even developing the car essentially. So I can see Perez going to Cadillac if the opportunity presents, obviously.
That's valid. I think I'm making that of Perez, but that's because his season has been so bad, and I don't understand how sure F1 is a money game, but it's still just crazy to me that Perez is still a viable option for teams. I think 24 we have seen so much shuffle. I think 25 will see less shuffle for 26. I mean, for that new season. I do agree with Vignesh that it will be an IndyCar driver that comes over. I would be highly surprised if we don't see either. Well, probably it is likely to be Colton Herta. I would be very surprised if we don't see him come over, to be honest. Alex Palou is another shout for Cadillac to bring over. But they will want to experienced drivers. So maybe we will see the comeback of Tsunoda versus Perez. That would be interesting. Who gets that seat?
I think we should obviously remember that Perez, like, though he has obviously had a very poor couple of seasons, that he has, it might just be because of Red Bull. Like, there was a time where we were talking about Perez as being one of the best drivers on the grid after a certain 2020 Sakir Grand Prix. So we know that he has the ability to drive a car like that. And so I think in hindsight, I can easily see maybe another team like Cadillac giving Perez a chance, especially when we know that he obviously has a lot of experience with Red Bull, and that could be very valuable for a team coming in. And we should just give a final mention to Hadjar, and I think this is, as we haven't really talked about him in this discussion, and he's obviously the driver that's coming in to replace Liam Lawson at RB. Katch, this has to be a huge opportunity for him to show what he's worth in the sport, and I think he's definitely deserving of it. He came second in the F2 Championship this year, and I think we could have all, even though it wasn't confirmed, we could have all guessed that he was going to get a chance in F1 at some point.
Yes, completely. And I think it is probably a deserved promotion, because who else would they bring in? I think it was obvious. He's been doing free practice sessions with Red Bull and RB since 2023. So it's obvious that they've been testing him out for a while. In the F2 season, he was going into the final round. He just had a poor final round. He was 0.5 points behind Bortoletto. So I think for F2, it's really good to see the first and second place driver in the championship both getting a promotion to F1. It's been a while since we've seen that. I think the last time must have been 2019 with the three rookies of Russell, Norris and Albon. But yeah, it is great for Hadjar. It'll be good to give him a season or two to kind of settle in, get used to how F1 works. I'm really hoping this works out for him, because he's been putting a lot of work in, and it would also, like I said, be great for F2. But yeah, it was an obvious promotion, like Callum said. Like, there's no way anyone else would have got that seat. So I'm not sure if this is a 1 year or a 2 year deal. I'm assuming it's a 1 year. Wouldn't be shocked with Red Bull if they did it a 2 year. But yeah, it does mean, like we've mentioned, there are technically 5 rookies on the grid. If we're counting Lawson, it's 6. I don't know if we're counting him as a rookie anymore, but it's his first full rookie season. But yeah, seeing like a fifth or a quarter of the grid being new drivers is so exciting to see. And to see some of these drivers in top teams like Antonelli, it will be really exciting. I think we're going to see a couple more safety cars in the 25 season as an early prediction. But yeah, I'm happy for Hajar. And it finally means this 2025 grid is sorted. It's only taken us until the 20th of December.
For context, yeah, Katch and I were planning an episode which will be coming very soon in the off season for going through the timeline of the construction, if you like, of the 2025 grid. We thought about this like a few months ago, and it's only just been completed.
I know. So for context, I've made the timeline now, and as a bit of a teaser for everyone, the first pin on my timeline is the 25th of January, when Leclerc signed his new deal to keep him here. And I'm still counting that. So, from the 25th of January until the 20th of December, that's how long it's taken.
It's been a year in the making. But it's going to be a really fun 2025 season with all of these switch ups that we found on the grid. But we'll have to see how all of those get on next year. Moving on to our other piece of news, and these are just some smaller ones which we'll quickly run through. But Bottas is going to be staying in the sort of F1 family, which I think is really great to hear after it was announced that he was leaving Sauber. He's actually going to be replacing Mick Schumacher as the Mercedes reserve driver. Vignesh, I think this is a great announcement. I think Bottas is someone that we all want to see around the grid, especially after his poor time at Sauber, which wasn't really his fault, I suppose, because the Sauber car just wasn't up to standard. And I think it's a good move for him.
Yeah, honestly, I think he would be quite useful to Merck for this year and maybe like, even 2026 as well, given how much the team struggled with correlation issues. So having a driver with Bottas's experience like help them with setup changes during a weekend might be useful, given that on a Friday they seem like the quickest team, and then come Saturday qualifying they are like the third or fourth quickest team, and that's been an issue that's been nagging them ever since the ground effect era started. So with this experience, maybe they might be able to sort out some of these issues for next year and probably put them on track for maybe a title challenge with Russell. Antonelli, I don't see him fighting for the title, and if anything, I don't this keeping him in this reserve role might boost the chance of getting Cadillac seat as well. Because as we've seen with Ricardo in 2023 and Lawson with Behrman, for example, having these reserve drivers roles, there's a chance that even in a one-off race, you might be able to race for the team. So having him around the back paddock is definitely a nice thing, and it's a nice thing to see Bottas in his unhinged version of himself. Like before while he was on Merck, he was quite subdued. To see this fresh version of him at Merck would be interesting. The PR department would be loving it. So yeah, it's nice to see.
Do you also think, Vignesh, that given that we have Kimi Antonelli coming into Mercedes for 2025, and he's obviously going to be a very experienced F2 driver coming into one of the biggest seats in F1, do you think that maybe Bottas could act as a sort of mentor for him and give him that person to go to for improving his racecraft in what is ultimately a very huge opportunity for him?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the main reasons why he was probably brought back, apart from the fact that he can help them with the car development or like any sort of issues they face with the correlation and stuff. Having a driver with experience mentor me through like phases, like for example, if he's struggling through a particular phase in the season, having a Bottas like mentor would definitely help, given that Bottas arguably raced against to get his all-time in Lewis Hamilton. So the pressure that he had to put up with while he's against Lewis would definitely be helpful when he shares his knowledge with Kimi. And yeah, honestly, it's a good thing for him. It's a good thing to see him leave Sauber, given how bad they were, and the fact that he finished pointless is kind of sad. But I guess at the end of the day, it's nice to see him back in a. I know, although he's not on the grid, it's nice to see him back at the Merck family.
Sorry, I think he is like Perez targeting a 2026 seat, and that makes sense. On social media, it has he's been a bit more unhinged. I think Sauber promised him a better car, a better situation than he had for these 3 years. Can we remember? Him and Zhou have been partners and on the grid for 3 years, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, I think he will be targeting 26. I think it's likely we'll see him back. But like everyone said, it makes a lot of sense for Mercedes. It's a nice home for him. And it's like, for Ricciardo, Red Bull's a home for him. So it'll be good to see him get involved. Maybe we'll see him a bit more around the paddock as well, which would be nice.
We're talking about a driver who was ultimately at the best team on the grid in Mercedes, going to Sauber, where his highlight for the season was doing an Ironman in his own home and wasn't even on the anything to do with F1 at all. But yeah, certainly a good move for him, I can think, and it'll be interesting to see how he gets on there in 2025. And who knows, maybe we'll see him on the grid again for 2026. And a couple more things just to mention. Cadillac have announced that they are going to use Ferrari engines as we expected for their debut in 2026 before they, I think, mentioned perhaps trying to build their own engines for a couple of years onwards. And also, finally, we have the announcement that the Dutch Grand Prix will not be renewed for 2026. Katch, we'll come to you. We'll come to you for this one. Obviously, the Dutch Grand Prix was very good this year, especially for you being a Norris fan. Was ultimately one of Norris's most dominant victories from 2024. But I think it's the Dutch Grand Prix we're not missing too much maybe from the grid was my first impression. We know it's it's not really made for F1 cars and that it's quite tight, it's quite narrow, and so it's very difficult to overtake there. And so it's maybe not the worst track to lose.
I am in agreement. It's not really the worst. I'm a bit surprised as well. There are worse tracks that we can lose. Hopefully this is a sign towards maybe them cutting down. This is just not happening, but I'm being optimistic. Maybe it's a sign they're thinking of cutting the races down from 24. Possibly. Who knows? It's probably not going to happen. But it has been a good track. I think they are probably concerned that once Max leaves, they're not going to have the funds for it because I don't think it's state supported. So, yeah, it's a bit sad, but it also makes a lot of sense. It will be incredible next year. It's always, every year we've gone there, it's been such a great environment. It's been so basically a music festival, and it's fun to see. But yeah, it's a bit sad to see. Not unexpected though.
Yeah, I certainly don't think we're going to be cutting down on our season, especially given that the other bit of news that we left out, Mohammed bin Sulayem getting more power in terms of his control over F1, and he's going to be wanting some more money for his Lamborghinis, I'm sure. Vignesh, I think, what are your thoughts on this? Are you along similar lines that it's not perhaps the worst one to lose? Obviously, the Dutch Grand Prix, we've had some really good times there, but it's maybe not a surprise if they, as Katch mentioned, not state funded, that it will be lost for the F1 grid on 2026.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I don't think it was the best in terms of racing action. I know last 2023 was a pretty good race and because of the rain and the changing conditions, but in general, most of the races there have been pretty straightforward wins for whoever started on pole. So yeah, I'm not sad to see this go. Also, I agree that you mentioned that they're probably not going to cut down the number of races. I can see it only going up, and the sprint race is going up as well, which I won't talk about again. But the point is, I feel like the way Liberty Media and F1 are moving, I could see them even cutting down on good tracks like Spa. I hope it isn't the case, but the way I see, they might bring up like a rotating calendar where they rotate the different tracks in Europe. So like one year we may not have Spa, next year we may have Spa, and the same year they change it with Imola. So that's how I see F1 moving forward. And if we were to lose Zandvoort and probably gain a track like Kailami in South Africa instead, then I'm all for it. I think it's high time that we had like different tracks across Asia and Africa, and maybe to ease off some, like in terms of like having a decent chunk of races in Europe, we could probably have 1 or 2 more races in Asia and help expand the F1 market essentially.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting to, as you mentioned, expand and get some different racetracks that maybe we're not used to. And I think if it means that that we have to replace a track such as Zandvoort, then I suppose I wouldn't be too disappointed to see that happening. But yeah, we'll have to see how the calendar switches up. That's all the kind of notable news that we've found since our last news episode, so over the past month. So yeah, that is pretty much it. We're going to wrap it up there. Remember, we will also have plenty more episodes to keep you occupied over the off season before we get racing in 2025. We're going to have another episode coming out on our driver rankings for the 2024 season. And as we mentioned, the timeline for how we got to the 2025 grid, which is now completed and is looking very exciting. I'm sure we're all very excited to see winter testing, see how these new drivers get on, and obviously our first race in Melbourne. But until then, thank you very much, Katch and Vignesh, for joining me. I've been your host, Callum. Have a very good Christmas, and until next time, goodbye.